Once again, good afternoon. And what I want to share today is entitled Deeper with God Through the Psalms. An Old Testament scholar by the name of Walter Brueggemann observed that 66% of Psalms actually are laments to God. You know, when we think about Psalms, what do we think about? Maybe we think of it as praise or worship or hope or, promises of God. But why is that? I suppose laments may be negative. They don't make perhaps great worship songs. Maybe the music industry will not make a lot of money if the songs are all sad and gloomy. But it may be to our loss when we do not imitate the psalmists. To lament is to have an outpouring of grief and sorrow. And perhaps that's the reason why many of us gravitate to the Psalms when we go through a very tough time, because the words that the psalmists are saying to God simply really resonates with something that we feel in our heart. I've been taught in the church certainly to be open about my life, to share, to get with people. All that's good and true. But I'm not sure if I've been reminded enough to lament with God and lament to God. And I think maybe the balance sometimes can be tilted too far one way. What I need, and I suspect the church needs more of, is to be reminded and to be shown how to pour our personal grief and sorrow and sadness to God. The last 2 years have been interesting and challenging time of transition for me. But it also has been a time where I drew closer to God the most. When I cannot talk to many about what I'm experiencing, I had to go to God and pour out to Him. Most times, God was painfully silent, but on occasions, like a rainbow after the storm, God speaks to me in the most intimate and assuring way. So I wrote down some psalms and meditations that I had the last 2 years. I wish to share some of those with you today. I'm not sure if it will help you to have a deeper understanding of Psalms, but I want to stress that I'm describing my thoughts and not prescribing any solutions to anyone. You may not experience what I read in a similar way, but I hope to encourage you and stir you to your own journey into getting deeper with God if you wish to go through the book of Psalms. And I believe that for me, I certainly experienced a peace from God that passes all understanding, which means that even if I try to figure it out, I cannot. It's beyond all human understanding and reasoning. So here I go. So the first psalm I want to share is from Psalms 119, 153. Look on my suffering and deliver me, for I have not forgotten your law. I meditate on this quite a bit, Sometimes I recite it, just one verse, over and over and over. Maybe it takes about 30 times before the words even sink in, but I do that quite a bit. I ask God, look upon my suffering and deliver me. I say it until I feel it. And when I feel it, I believe it. And when I believe it, I will act on it, right? I believe that crying out to God plus holding on to God will produce something. Because as you think about anything that's good, there are processes, right? Steel is a product of iron and fire. Linen is produced when flax is harvested, soaks in water, dried out in the air, and then beaten with a stick until the fibers inside break, and then combed with steel nails until the coarser fibers are removed. And then finally it's linen, and then it has to be weaved. Just think about the processes that produces linen. Of course, that's the old way of doing it. But it takes time, it takes effort, and in many instances, These processes looks painful. I mean, the list goes on. Diamond has to be mined, it has to be cut, it has to be polished. But something plus something plus something produces the final, better, wonderful product. And I believe that whatever tough times I'm going through, plus God's law, plus prayer, plus patience, produces a character that trusts God. I want to encourage us to pray more and pray often. And I certainly am blessed that before work, I have time to pray. That is when I was still going to office. But even at home, certainly I have time to pray before work. And during lunchtime, I have time to pray. And these often form anchor points for me to ground myself to, so that my thoughts don't run wild and that I'm not overtaken by fear or anxiety or anger or bitterness, or all kinds of other unhealthy feelings. On happiness, I think the pursuit of happiness and the notion that it is a birthright can sometimes be taken to such an extreme that we feel entitled to it. Yet happiness is but one out of hundreds of feelings that makes up the depth of being alive. Happiness should be one, not the refuge that we run to avoid the rest of the human journey. Certainly, I'm not saying let's look for pain. I'm saying that, on the other hand, sometimes having a bad day, if we tell ourselves, if it's a normal day, then we'll be pleasantly surprised by God when He blesses us. And actually, I didn't learn that by myself. I heard that from a friend. He says, if you think of a bad day as a normal day, he said, then any day is bearable. And I don't know about, certainly, I'm not saying something applicable to all. I stress again, I'm describing and not prescribing what you should do. But I find that very helpful for myself. Ecclesiastes 7:3 certainly says, sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of face, the heart is made glad. In laughter, we rarely consider difficult parts of our lives and how we can change. But during difficult and sorrowful times, we often have to make adjustments in our thoughts and actions. And when we stay close to God, we begin to rely on Him and feel closer to Him. I said earlier on, before I start work, I will have time of prayer. For at least 1 year, when I started my new job, I reached my office at 7:45 in the morning and have about 40 minutes of silence and Bible reading and prayer before my work begins at 8:30. And I meditate, and like what I said just now, this Psalm, one verse, I'll read it, and sometimes slowly. And perhaps many of us are familiar with Lectio Divina. Lectio Divina is the practice of reading God's words slowly, intentionally, in a reflective and emotive way. And like I said, maybe sometimes it takes 30 or 50 times before the words really start to mean something to me. But those are moments when I feel God really speaks to me. And many times, I may not feel anything, but I trust God as I hold on to His law. Psalms 84, verses 5-6 in the Amplified Classic Version says, blessed is the man whose strength is in you, in whose heart are the highways to Zion. Passing through the valley of weeping, they make it a place of spring. So the early rain also fills the pools with blessings. Psalms it's not uncommon for the writer to alternate between describing a physical journey with a figurative spiritual journey. The first part of this Psalms is meant to be read like an exclamation. Oh, blessedness! Okay, that's why it's blessed, happy, fortunate, to be envied. To be envied is who and what. To be envied is the man whose strength is in God. Every day, and I keep stressing every day because I have to learn, and I'm still learning, to train my mind and my heart to gravitate more to God than my own wisdom or own experience or my own opinions. I try to remind myself every day before the start of the day that my strength, my motivation, and my passion is in God. The outcome of my work, good or bad, the people I cross paths with, kind or not so kind, the feelings of highs and lows, happy or disappointed, I try to develop an awareness that God is the giver of all things. Then I begin to actually experience a sense of a lightheartedness. And throughout the day, because I'm so forgetful, I find it very helpful to repeat that process at lunch. I remind myself again, before work begins, after lunch, God is the one, He's the giver of all things. In every big task or small task, I always strive to give my best, but I surrender outcomes to Him. Well, listen, it's a delicate balance, which is why I have to constantly practice it. Else I go back to full on, I need to make sure this or that happens in my life, or else I won't have peace mode. I'll go back to that mode. I have a grip on things, but a loose grip. Because no grip means I don't try. But a tight grip means that I'm trying to control outcomes, events, and people. It says that passing through the valley of Baca. Baca means weeping in Hebrew. It may be referring to balsam or mulberry trees that drip tear-like gum or resin. These trees only grow in dry, arid places. So scholars believe that the Valley of Baca may be an actual place, but it also may figuratively mean a time of difficulty, because valley, low point, dry, only these trees grow. So a dry period with God, a low point in life, a difficult path or journey towards God. But when our strength is in God, and when our heart is set on the highways of Zion, meaning we're walking on the path of righteousness, then a curious thing happens. The Valley of Baca becomes filled with springs of water. I like to imagine this. I can't verify it, but I like to imagine that the pilgrims' tears as they go through difficult times, these tears shed while going through trying times, combined with rain from God in the form of a relief, fills up the dry valley with springs of water. In other words, I have to learn to trust that somehow God's providential grace, combined with my daily struggles, will become a blessing in His timeline, not mine. So I won't and I don't worry about being a blessing, but my task remains to keep my mind and eyes fixed on Him. My wife Joyce, she prays daily that let whatever is within her and without her that is not of God be removed so that God can do His work. And I feel that this kind of spiritual posture helps me to ensure that my ego, that my self-serving thoughts, that my fear and my faithlessness is always kept in check. Every day, let whatever is in me and outside of me that is not of God, let that be removed. No one can really say that we've reached Zion in our inner space. We may find ourselves slipping back and forth emotionally and spiritually, then having to traverse this landscape again and again. For Joyce and myself, I think we were in a better place emotionally and spiritually about 2 years back. But with events in the past 1 year, we feel at times drawn back to old, familiar, and unpleasant feelings once again. So what do? I train my mind and my heart to draw strength from God make sure that my feet is walking on the righteous path, put one foot in front of the other, one step at a time, one moment at a time, one day at a time, and I trust that God will make it a blessing in his timeline to others. Psalms 134 verse 1. Praise the Lord, all you servants of the Lord who minister by night in the house of the Lord. This is the Psalms of Ascent. And some people believe that it was after the pilgrims reached the temple, they worshipped, and then as night comes, as they were descending from the hill, they look back and they still see the servants of God who are still ministering in the temple. And they sing this psalms to them, to remember them, to remember servants who serve by night. And then also in Psalm 77, it says, I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out untiring hands and I would not be comforted. I remember you and I groaned. I meditated and my spirit grew faint. You kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. I thought about the former days, the years of long ago. I remember my songs in the night. My heart meditated and my spirit asked, will the Lord reject forever? Will he never show his favor again? And I believe certainly you can see in Psalm 77, just the spirit of lamenting. Because even as he prayed to God, he says he cannot be comforted. The psalmist groaned. The psalmist's spirit grew faint. His eyes, he couldn't sleep and too troubled to speak, right? If the sunlit day represents hope, faith, love, God's glory and power, then night may perhaps represent the opposite. It may mean a time of despair, groaning, crying, distress, discomfort, having a troubled spirit and a troubled heart. Just want to caveat before I go any further, this is not a talk on how to deal with mental health issues. Okay? So if there are serious issues that one is experiencing, you should talk to qualified professionals. But John of the Cross was a 16th century Catholic priest and mystic who is more famous for his writings, especially for what he termed as the dark night of the soul. DNOTS, dark night of the soul. It is described as a period of self-doubt, of one losing faith, of despair, of hopelessness, and not even being able to pray, and even doubting the existence of God. The DNOTS is not something only experienced by some. It's a necessary part of our spiritual journey through this life. All of us, at one point or another, will experience it. So if you're not going through DNOTS, don't worry. It will come soon to you. And it may not just be once or twice. We may have to go through it again and again. I have to say that maybe the last 5 or 6 years, it has been such dark nights for me. For my wife, it has even been longer. There were, I feel, relatively few breaks. And when I thought sometimes God was bringing about a change, events happened that make me feel even more hopeless about serving God. But what I find solace is when I reflect and pray through the Psalms. Because even in my DNOTS, I shall not abandon God. Even in my dark night, I shall remember the songs I can sing to him. My self-worth does not come from what I do. My worth comes from God who loves me and accepts me. On and off, people have reached out to me and sometimes they ask me if I miss preaching. I honestly don't think about it very much because public preaching does not give me the identity that I seek. It was part of my job for 25 years and I strive to do my job well as serving the Lord, not for men. But once that job is over, I tried to find other ways to love and to serve God. I got to share about Mother Teresa, a famed figure who served the poor for decades, won the hearts of millions, won the Nobel Prize, and was eventually made a saint by the Catholic Church. She was still making an impact after she died, because in 2007, Come Be My Light, a book that collected many of her most personal and private correspondences, was published. It immediately caused sorrow and confusion among her admirers and a glee among those who didn't like her and her detractors. Her letters reveal that except for one short period in her life, Teresa had been afflicted with a deep sense of God's absence, mostly for the last 50 years of her life. The world only knew her dedication to God's work and completely was unsuspecting of a spiritual darkness. Many Christians were confused. What did her long stay in spiritual wilderness mean? Was she a victim of depression? Has she lost faith in God? What gave her the inner strength to carry on even when she anguished over what she felt to be God's abandonment of her? Even her closest companions in the missionaries of charity were bewildered. Never had she made any reference to the darkness, except for an occasional reference that actually meant nothing to anyone except to her spiritual directors and confessors with whom she shared what she was going through. Some people call her a false saint. Others lamented that if she felt abandoned by God, that what chance do the rest of us have? Yet there's a good ending to this. Because in the book, she said she remembered an oath she made in 1942 that she will never deny God anything that God asked of her. And she realized that the loyalty to the oath means embracing even God's withdrawal. Quote, we must know exactly when we say yes to God, what is in that yes. Yes means I surrender, totally, fully, without counting the cost. It means accepting whatever God gave and giving whatever God chose to take away. And for Mother Teresa, it meant accepting the burden of Christ's passion. When she was finally allowed insight into the nature of her darkness, she recognized it as an inevitable aspect of a calling within a calling. In other words, she was called to serve the poor, but there was another calling that was deeper, that she had to hold on to God despite not feeling God's presence. And she would go so far as to say that she actually loved the darkness because it was a very, very small part of Jesus's darkness and pain on this earth. Brothers and sisters, Ecclesiastes 3 says there is a time for everything, a season for every activity under the heavens. We all experience different seasons in life, different seasons physically, emotionally, and spiritually. What do we do with changing seasons? I know Singapore, we don't have seasons, but you may have traveled to places specifically to experience winter. When seasons change, I don't fight the seasons. I lean in to work with it. I don't pretend it's summer when it's actually winter. That would be disastrous. I'm reminded that after a prolonged cold spell, there is new life. God is with me in the darkness and in the light. In fact, many times in my experience, God is even more alive to me in the darkness than when I am enjoying all the good things that God is giving me. Can good things come out of darkness? I leave you with these thoughts. The Balkan rose is harvested at night because rose lose up to 50% of their oils in the day. Good things can come from the night. When the angels came and found Jesus, they came in the night. When Paul and Peter sang in prison, it was in the night, almost midnight. When it's the darkest, when we hold on to God, God's light can shine the brightest. But through the darkness, God is alive to me. And I hope that if you would like to try meditating on the Psalms, I hope that you can experience God's light in the same way. My invitation for you today is to stay with God and hold on to God as we may be experiencing a deeper relationship with God through the Psalms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keong, for sharing your heart. I know you have gone through the darkness many times and come out strengthened by God. And now you're pointing us to God, who will always be the God for the hurting and the brokenhearted. You know, we live in a culture of which celebrates health and strength and success more than any other thing. And I have also sold myself into such a mindset. I have little space and patience for pain and for darkness. But today I'm thankful to hear that sorrow and darkness is a crucial part of God's plan for me to draw near to Him. And He's the closest to us at such times, even if we think that He's far and distant. I used to gravitate towards sadness and sorrow. And I remember that it was through my own dark times when I first thought about God and came to faith. But somehow over the years, I mistakenly conclude that my feelings cannot be trusted. So I deny them and I quash them. I get confused between being fired up and having true joy, which comes from pain and suffering, because I know God has not forsaken me. I've sacrificed slow and deep listening to God over quick and fast-paced actions and results. I also become detached from myself and from others. And now I know that in the book of Philippians, that talks about the peace that goes beyond understanding, which will come through rejoicing. But that rejoicing comes only after we have gone through necessary darkness with God. I'm sure all of us will find our own darkness within us and allow God to come in to be with us. But really, really want to thank you for sharing your heart and for helping me to see that today. Thanks, bro.